For 25 years I've been researching it, and how do you get that information?
That you create interest that give you a chance to further. Are we ready?
Yeah, we just, if I could go to the bathroom for a second.
It's just going to get to that.
Oh.
Once we get they
Finish
got
it by the
pretty large.
extensions. Amazing.
That's great.
You made it.
Somehow, what I'll do is go back.
If you bring cupcakes.
He's there in the 2 days, but I've got all the paperwork at this stage.
Where?
A wonderful presentation available for you today. My name is Dorothy Doherty. I'm the Programs Director for the National Archives here at New York City. And I was approached by Dr. Richmond, who said, did you know there's a horn out there that was owned by Alexander Hamilton? And I said, well, that sounds pretty fascinating, since we are also in the Alexander Hamilton U.S. Custom House. And so when Dr. Richmond proposed giving a lecture on his object, which is absolutely stunning, and then he offered to showcase it here today, we were very happy to be able to do that. So we thank you, Dr. Richmond. And just a quick little bio about Dr. Richmond. As you might have seen on the flyer, Dr. Richmond has an undergraduate degree from the College of William and Mary in Virginia. He has a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's a member of Mensa. He has spent over 20 years researching Alexander Hamilton's powder horn and its relationship to Hamilton, and he will tell you in great detail all about that as well today. He has spoken previously at the Museum of American Finance, which is just down the street from us. He also has done a presentation at the NRA Museum and had his powder horn at display at both those facilities. So we're very pleased to have you here today, Dr. Richmond. And just so everyone knows, Dr. Richmond is happy to answer questions after the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To really understand the powder horn, we have to understand the motivation of Alexander Hamilton, his past, how he grew up, and what he was doing all this time. So to start out, I guess we should explain what a powder horn is. A powder horn is usually made out of the horn of a cow. It's hollowed out. There's a stopper put on one end, and you use it to store gunpowder. Basically, without a powder horn, any of the colonial arms would have been useless. It would just be like a tube of metal. You had to have the gunpowder. So everybody at that time period had a powder horn, or at least a young male would, and they were going around the streets with it, and most people decorated it for various reasons, but it was very handy to have your name on it, Alexander Hamilton. He put the date on it right over here. But if you were, let's say you were in the field and they were getting ready for a battle, everybody turned in their powder horns and they got filled up from a big barrel, and you want to make sure that the right powder horn got back to the right person. So in this case, this provided a unique opportunity to Hamilton because he had spent a long time studying this motivational symbolism, and one of the key things about it is that it should be in front of you every day. You should be able to visualize it and project it and live what these symbols say. So by having it on the powder horn, it was with him every day. You could take a look at it as he was walking around. But also, it was something that was kind of an inside joke, because here it is, he's got the keys to his whole success, to his whole future, right in front of everybody, but nobody understands it because it's all symbols, it's all symbolism. Just like other people have put pictures of battles or buildings or animals on their powder horn, he puts the symbols in front of those. basically, to just talk about this, 1773 is the year when Hamilton arrived. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, Hamilton was born in 1757. He lived for about 8 years in Nevis, and then for another 8 years in St. Croix. He was very poor. His father left at an early age. He really had no resources. He lacked, as he put it, he lacked fortune. In this case, fortune not just being the dollars and cents. Fortune meant from the goddess Fortuna. He didn't have any luck. Everything went wrong. So he ended up at an early age working for as a clerk for Kruger and Sons. And he inherited, luckily, 34 books, which were very important to his development because he was almost entirely homeschooled. He and his friend Ned Stevens read through these books. Now, the books happen to be things like the usual things of the classics, any of the battle stories. But the two books that were most important to him were the philosophy, the essays of Sir Francis Bacon, and Machiavelli's The Prince. So what he did was carve these into his powder horn. Now, as I said, in 1757 he was born. In 1769, when he was 12 years old, he wrote a letter to his friend Ned Stevens, who had already gone to the colonies. And basically he's telling him not to tell anybody else that he is reinventing himself. And a lot of the wording that you see in the letter is taken directly from the philosophy of Sir Francis Bacon. And this was a sort of a code that he had that Ned would understand what he was saying. He uses specifically things like when the projector is constant. If you know Sir Francis Bacon, one of his things he's very famous for is the concept of astral projection and visualization. Words such as projector would be a dead giveaway. Also, you notice he ends by saying, "I wish there was war." It's not because he wanted necessarily a war to occur or that he was in favor of everybody killing each other. It's because Machiavelli had said that if you have nothing and you expect to succeed or move forward, the best way to do that is in the military, because then you could find advancement by your own achievements, not by who you are and who you know and everything else. And if there happens to be a war at the same time, then you can advance really fast. So that's why he's saying, I wish there was a war. It was much to his advantage when he appeared. He wanted people to see a young immigrant full of opportunity and full of success, not somebody who was coming from poverty and had nothing going for him. He wanted to recreate himself entirely. It's a new Hamilton that's arriving. That's why on the powder horn it has Alexander Hamilton, 1773. That's his year of rebirth. That's what he's doing. So if we look at the Sir Francis Bacon's philosophy, we see that, well, this is something, of course, that was very important to Hamilton. Every man is the architect of his own fortune. And then what this comes from is Sir Francis Bacon had a group of essays. And one of the essays that he had was what to do if you lack fortune. So it's almost like, a dummy's guide nowadays. You flip through it and you come to the area involving fortune. So what does he say? He says, first, it's the amendment of your own minds, removing the impediments of the mind will clear the passages of fortune, wealth and means, reputation and honor. So if you can get these four things, then you can completely turn around your life and you will then have what he calls fortune. Machiavelli also speaks about this. And his idea of fortune is the idea of skillful self-advancement, flexibility, bold and cautious, and better to be rationally cautious. So I think you can see items like that happening in Hamilton's life. Now, when I read about this, these things, Sir Francis Bacon was writing in the mid-1500s. So you begin to wonder, are these motivational techniques current today? Are they really valid? Will things like this work for Hamilton? What's written on the horn, these symbols, that's his personal mission statement. That's what he wants to achieve, and that's what he wants to keep in front of him every day. So we're going to get now to what these symbols represent that are on the powder horn. And it might be interesting to know, I don't know if you know that Hamilton had a friend that he adopted almost immediately when he came to the colonies. His name was Hercules Logan. And see some of us know that. Okay. So at their first attack on the fort at the base of Manhattan, there is a story that Hercules Mulligan tells. He's a primary source because he's telling it himself. And he told it basically to show how brave Alexander Hamilton was, but it really gives us some other information. Hamilton appointed Hercules Mulligan to guard the entrance to the, I guess the armory where they stored all of their, the British stored all of their weapons. And the Americans raided it. Hamilton was in the lead, they were taking the cannons, everything, every possible arm they could get hold of. But he asked Hercules Mulligan, who was a big fellow, obviously from his name, Hercules, and he was supposed to guard the door, and Hamilton gave him his weapons, his gun, his powder horn. So midway through, after they'd gotten everything out of there, the British somehow found out what was going on. They started shelling the fort. The Americans, on the other hand, since they've gotten most everything out, they started getting ready to destroy it also. So the place was going up in flames. There was smoke going. Everybody was fleeing. Hercules Mulligan was on his way running out. So Hamilton comes out, and he looks at him and he says, "Where's my arms? Where is my..." And he said, "I'm not staying in there. I'm not going in there. You know, I left them in there. I ran out." So Hamilton looks at him silently, and he was probably furious. He turns around, he walks back in, and he retrieves his powder horn and his rifle. Now, that's a very interesting story. It's not the way that Mulligan sees it, but from my standpoint, I look at it a different way. If you've just raided the armory, and you've got all of the British armaments, and you've got all the cannons, and you've got your choice of any musket or rifle that you want, any powder horn that you want, whatever you want, they've got thousands of them there. Why would you risk your life to go back in and get your powder horn? That powder horn meant something very special to Hamilton. It wasn't something he was willing to risk his life for. You actually see things like this. Well, there are a lot of things that are symbols that people are ready to die for, that you know, he put everything into this. Now, these are the symbols that are on the powder horn. So we start off with, well, if you look on it, you've probably noticed there's a unicorn. And the unicorn is sort of a universal symbol for hopes and aspirations. So that's kind of a catch-all for, you know, what Hamilton hopes to achieve. So you have the first thing to do, Bacon said, is the amendment of your own minds. So in order to achieve what you want to get out of life, the first thing is you have to overcome a psychological barrier. You have to say, I can do this, you know, this is not a problem. So in his case, he used it by saying, first one came to Ohio. And it's almost like in the Odyssey or the Iliad where there's the conquering hero coming back. He's saying, like, you know, I'm a general and I'm entering the Ohio territory. Back then in 1773, that was an area of combat, and if you were going to be fighting, he would have been fighting in the Ohio territory. We're going to come back to Ohio later a little bit too, because Ohio is written pretty prominently on the powderhorn, and it has other associations for Hamilton. Well, for the means, there's a picture of a fenced-in house, and that's would have been a symbol for somebody who was living in the islands on, you know, a little place like that. That would have been wealth, reputation. That's the Faeces. The Faeces is the group of sticks that's tied together with the ribbon, and in some cases it has an axe in the center, sometimes it doesn't. A few pictures later will go into this. And honor, of course, is his St. Paul from his Scottish coat of arms. So to go through these, one by one, this is the unicorn, first one, and it's a very interesting unicorn because not only is it his hopes and aspirations, not only is it the symbol of Scotland, he's put a St. Paul on it, the symbol of Hamilton. And so far as I can see, nobody brands a unicorn. It's a very unusual thing to do. Now that we've discussed the symbolism and the motivation, you might have a question, you know, how did Hamilton think using this when he was surrounded by the powderhorn every day and he's looking at it? How does he decide to go forward? Well, he was first appointed to an artillery company, and he took the cannons that he captured, and he formed his own company of 50 men. But when I was reading the history about it, I found an interesting story. It said that he, out of his own pocket, furnished the uniforms for the 50 men, his entire company. Now, when you think about it, Hamilton had virtually no money at all. You know, maybe he had the equivalent of $20, something like that. So first of all, how could he pay for all these uniforms? And second of all, why was that his priority? I mean, lots of things were short in the American Army. They didn't have enough cannons and weapons and gunpowder and everything else. And why did he take the money and spend it on uniforms? Well, to understand that, you have to understand that what Hamilton needed most was to get on the general staff of the Army so he could be near George Washington. He needed to be in a position where he could meet the other generals, where he could advance himself in society and gain a measure of control. It wouldn't do for him to just be in the Army and then when the battle was won, just go home, because he had no place to go to. There was no real exit strategy that way. He needed to advance himself, and the best way to do this was to be on the general staff, because during the winter time, there wasn't much fighting going on. There was a lot of socializing done. And being in the center of this whole network, it would be great for him. The other part is General Washington needed a translator. And of course, Hamilton spoke French. For him to communicate with Lafayette and the other volunteers, it was very helpful. Even von Steuben, who mostly spoke German, also spoke French. So Hamilton helped translate his manual of arms. So here's the thing. He's there with Hercules Logan. Hercules Logan, by the way, was an Irish tailor. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the way things were back then, but you didn't, as a private in the Army or as a low recruit, you got your uniform. But once you got above, you became an officer like a lieutenant, captain, major, colonel, general. You provided your own uniforms, and you were given money for that. So that's where Hercules Logan comes in. He also was a great spy for Hamilton, because all of the high officers, American and British, seemed to go to Hercules Logan and get their uniforms made. So anyway, he's here talking to Mulligan, and he finds out that George Washington has a very important connection with his own uniform that he used in the French and Indian War. It happens that 3 times there were bullet holes in his uniform, and he wasn't scratched at all. So he was very attached to his uniform. And one of his greatest disappointments when he took over the American Army was he saw a ragtag bunch of troops. He didn't see a unified army that had uniforms, and it was a constant source of complaint from Washington. So Mulligan talks to Hamilton, and they get a great idea. He decides to make these uniforms for all of 50 troops, the whole artillery company, and to copy George Washington's uniform. It was his personal uniform. You were allowed to have, whatever uniform you wanted. This was Washington's. It had a blue center. It had a buff on the edges over here. It had a buff vest and buff pants. So what happened was he put his troops on the side of the hill. He's defending everything. Washington sees him up there. And of course, he's going to come over there and say, hey, what's going on? And all of a sudden, everybody's wearing my uniform. So he achieves two things. He gets, not only does he get to meet Washington, but he gets to meet him on his terms. Washington was coming to him. And then he can say, oh, by the way, I understand you need a clerk, you need maybe somebody who speaks French, maybe I'd be more used to you here. So that's how he made his way up. So this is how he gained his entree to George Washington. I don't know if you realize it, but the night before the duel, when Hamilton was killed, he revised his will. And he talks in his will, right over here, though it shall please God to spare my life, I may look for a considerable surplus out of my present property. But if he should possibly call me to the eternal world, a forced sale as usual may possibly make it insufficient to satisfy my debts. And after that, he asks his family and his children to pay for the money that he owes. Well, the interesting part about it is he talks about this asset of his, which may or may not pay the bills that he owes, but he never actually mentions what it is. So that got me thinking, and I needed to know what it was. So I started looking at the newspapers of that period, and I got hold of the February 1806 New York Evening Post, which was Hamilton's own paper. But this is the New York Evening Post, February 5th, 1806. And if we look at it carefully, at the bottom, these five gentlemen, Gouverneur Morris, Rufus King, Egbert Benson, Oliver Wolcott, and Charles Wilkes, four of them at least are signers of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. They're very important people in early America. They were handling the estate of Hamilton. So they're talking about how they dealt with this. And apparently, when Hamilton died, there was a debt of about $80,000. And we can infer that from the issuance of about 400 certificates at $200 each. That's how they were going to pay off the debt. Now, part of it was paid off by the sale of the Grange, his house, and all the possessions, which is one of the reasons why, if you look around today, you find almost nothing that belonged to Alexander Hamilton, because it was almost all sold off. Even if you go to the Hamilton house, which is here in Manhattan, I don't think there's anything that's original there. It's all been reconstructed. The $80,000 in 1804 translates, and it depends on who does the translation, but it's about $4,800,000 in today's money. So you can see it was quite a bit of money to come up with. So what we're getting at is what he's talking about, or hasn't talked about, is almost 40,000 acres of Ohio land that he's invested in. So even though you won't find it, I don't think in any of the books that I've seen, the only things that Hamilton was invested in is his house, the Grange, and almost every cent of his money, whatever he could borrow or had, went into buying Ohio land. He was very much in favor of Ohio. So yes, there was when he had the powder horn by his side and he saw Ohio on there all the time, he was very much invested in Ohio. The Ohio Land Company had 1 million acres of Ohio land, and he owned 5 shares of the Ohio Land Company. So if you do a calculation that way, it's a lot more land, but we'll leave it like this.
And there's a gentleman in the back.
On the uniforms, and I know that you're focusing on the powder horn. If he had no money, how did he finance the 50 uniforms, even though he had his friend Mulligan make them? I mean,
Hercules Logan basically, I think, donated them to the cause. He had his store, and he furnished the fabric, and his people made them, and that's what happened. But Mulligan did a lot. Unfortunately, there's not too much written about him in the books until quite recently, but he served as a spy with Hamilton during the Revolution and was extremely effective. One of the things that he was responsible for was the British had given out this information that they were going to be attacking in the South, and Washington was getting ready to move all his troops south. But Hamilton got a message from Hercules Mulligan saying that the British had just placed a huge order for winter coats, and he learned from the people there that they were going north and not south. So that saved a lot of lives, and Mulligan was very effective. So much so that after the war was won and Hamilton and Washington came back to New York, the first thing they did was stop at Hercules Mulligan's store, and they were seen to hand him a bag of gold, and they had breakfast with him there to show that he was on the side of America. And the reason was that people were giving him a hard time. They thought he was on the British side because that was his act. That's how he was portraying himself. So in order to counteract that, Washington and Hamilton went out of their way to do that.
Can you tell us with right amount of detail, what is the provenance of the horn from the moment of Hamilton's death up until you're acquiring it, and how did you acquire it? And you might even tell us how you're going to deal with it in your will.
Well,
So starting in 1804, what happened?
there's Alexander Hamilton has it until 1804. In 1804, by the way, his son, William, who was Billy Hamilton, it went to Billy Hamilton. Billy Hamilton was an interesting character. He went to West Point. His mother gave it to him.
Okay.
And there are accounts of him actually wearing the powder horn and appearing as like Davy Crockett, as an outdoorsman with the powder horn on and his, all the accoutrements. So after what happened with Billy was, Billy had the lead mines out in Wyoto, and then he got pulled into the 1849 to the California Gold Rush. So in 1849 he was in California. There are mixed accounts of his death, but it was publicized that he died of cholera. Now, before he left a trunk with his important personal belongings with his landlady who was back in Wisconsin. So after he died, that trunk was shipped to New York to the Hamilton relatives who were here. Now, I have no proof of this, but I'm pretty sure that nobody wanted to open that trunk, because when you died of cholera back then, they couldn't ship his body back. Nobody would touch it. All the clothing got burned. Everything was hands off. So I believe that's one of the big reasons why the contents of the trunk survived. But then it ends up in New Jersey. The New Jersey relative does not have the same last name as Hamilton. I had a patient who did a lot of house clean-outs, things like that, when people die, and when their house was cleaned out.
So the trunk went to the part of his family in New Jersey. Is that about time,
Which-
approximately time frame of that?
I would say probably early 1900s.
Okay.
And then probably about, let's say 1970, something like that. Most of the relatives had cleared away, the parents had died, they were getting rid of the house, so they got rid of the contents. I don't even think that the guy who got the trunk even knew it was there.
Was the trunk open by this point? They had actually,
No.
still wasn't open? So we're talking up until, what time frame do you think it hadn't been open?
Probably from 1849 until maybe 100 years later, which I don't think is that unusual.
So do you think it wasn't open purposely, or was just forgotten about?
He wasn't wealthy, and I don't know, I guess he had a reputation as a gambler or whatever, but nobody would have thought, oh, there's treasures and jewels in this box. They probably thought it was his dirty laundry.
No, but whoa, you lost me. All right, so these people are old, and it's in their attic, so what happens at that point?
Okay, it was sold at an estate.
The trunk was sold.
The trunk was sold.
To your knowledge, probably unopened, it was sold.
Right.
Okay.
The patient got it, who bought it, who cleaned out houses and bought things.
Okay.
He accumulated a lot of colonial things, but he had died. His wife came to me, she was also my patient. She asked if I was interested in it, and we went back and forth, and she owed me a lot of things, and I can't go into who it is or whatever. But
Now, at that point, was the trunk open, and you knew the contents?
Yeah.
Oh,
She had
okay.
it.
And she opened it?
Yeah, her husband had actually given her the powder horn
Oh,
for
okay.
a wedding present. So, she knew what it was. She knew it was Alexander Hamilton's powder horn. She knew it had value. She even said that her husband at one point had gotten it, I guess, appraised. I think she said California, but she had none of the paperwork. So she wanted me to have it, and I wouldn't take it as a gift, but I bought it from her for a small amount and whatever she wanted. And I said, do you understand what this is? I mean, it's to be a national treasure. So yes, I want you to have it, because she really had no other family. So, went to me. And basically, my hope is that it remains.
Excuse me if I may, so what year was that you acquired it?
1990.
Okay.
So that's about 25 years now. So for that 25 years, what I've been trying to do, first, I had two things to do. One is I had to learn what is a powder horn and everything that related to powder horns and weapons and everything else. And secondly, I had to learn everything about young Hamilton and see where that fit into the symbols. Because one of the first problems I noticed was, if you look at the symbols on the powder horn, they're nothing like any other powder horn that's out there. Every one of them has, something different. This is all abstract symbolism, which is, very unusual. Even the wording, when you see the phrase "first one came to Ohio," the wording is almost like "when in the course of human events." It's a very intellectual type of wording that isn't used by the average person. It's used in like in important documents. So that's where it was at, and I've been doing the research. I've had it at Museum of American Finance and at the National Rifle Association Museum for the last 2 years as well. It was front and center right with their symbol of the NRA. And my hope is that it will remain in America, and if a very wealthy person would like to buy it and donate it to the appropriate museum, that would be great. So that's where we are.
Have you had it appraised?
It's been appraised for insurance purposes for a minimum, and I have to qualify it by that because most museums will not insure things for more than $1 million. So it was insured for at least $1 million. However, the badge of Cincinnati, which I believe was sold in 2007 at Sotheby's in New York, was sold for, I think, $5.3 million. So I would say to me, it's more of an artifact, American treasure than the Badge of Cincinnati, because the Badge of Cincinnati, they mass-produced, I would say, hundreds, thousands. These were given to people who served in the American Revolution, and they're passed down to the oldest son. So there are probably thousands of them in existence. Badge of Cincinnati, that badge. This one, George Washington had 3 of them, and he gave one to Lafayette. This is the one he gave to Lafayette. But as I said, it went for $5.3 million. To me, it's just not personal, because when I went to Lafayette, he put it in his drawer and he never wore it. It doesn't have any history attached to it. It is an artifact, and it was touched by George Washington, but that's about as far as it goes.
As Dr. Richmond pointed out, we have a site called Founders Online, which is searchable, so you can search for all the documents of Hamilton on that website, and it's getting great accolades. It's a great website, so I encourage you to go to the National Archives website and link to Founders Online. But I also want to give a couple of shout-outs, because we have folks from the Alexander Hamilton Association here today. We also have folks from the Lower Manhattan Historical Society, who are certainly big advocates for Alexander Hamilton and early American history, especially here in New York City. So they're wonderful groups to participate in if you'd like to get more information. I also want to give a shout out to the Grange, because you mentioned the Grange, Hamilton's home. He encourages everyone to go up to that site, because it's a beautiful place to go visit, and it's certainly all about Hamilton. And I want to conclude by thanking you, Dr. Richmond, for a wonderful presentation. And certainly we have the horn on display for just a little bit longer while you're here, so I encourage everyone to take a close look at it. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, she is completely.
Don't you think there should be like a 3-dimensional, like a rotational video about it?
That would catch a lot of people's attention, just
You guys have to get on that.
Maybe an MRI.
Have you opened it? Is there anything in it?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that.
Is it
Along the
new?
line, sometimes I've gotten some other powder horns, and one, there was something rattling around inside of it, and I couldn't open it, and I couldn't